May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. So normally I prefer to preach without notes, but this week I need some notes for various reasons. So something I've been hearing a lot this week and feeling a lot this week is the sentiment that it is all just too much. For many of us right now, life, the world, the news, it feels like more than we can bear. Whether it's because of violence in the world, wars, the cycle of bad news after bad news, facing death because we're dealing with a major illness, facing a loved one's death. Many of us are feeling like our souls, our lives, the world itself is like that valley of dried bones. That's quite an image of hopelessness. There's not even a stirring of life. Life has been so stripped from those bones that they are dry and brittle. They are an image of death upon death, ready only for disintegration back to the dust. In Ezekiel, it is a picture of the hopelessness and loss the people were feeling. They were living in exile, and they had lost everything that had once given them a reason to hope. They had lost their homes, their land. They had lost the temple, which for them was God's home and the center of worship. They had even lost faith in the kings that they had begged for in order to save them from a fate that had now come to pass. Hope seemed gone and life futile. A valley of dry bones. And yet, God not only knits those bones back together and puts flesh and sinew on them, God breathes spirit, breath into them, gives life back to them. It's tempting to read this as a story about individual resurrection, about what happens after death, especially when it's paired with a story like we have today in Lazarus. But that's not really what this story is about. It's about communal restoration. It's a prophecy meant for the whole community of people who had lost their center and their purpose, their freedom, and seemingly even their connection to God. And God promises new life for the whole community, a return to their home, and God's Spirit alive in them once again. When we look at the world around us, it can feel like the possibility of our community, our nation, our whole world coming in line with God's love, coming in line with God's desire for joy and peace for all of us is as hopeless as a valley of dry bones. And if it's up to us to make those bones live again, it is hopeless. When Ezekiel is asked if the bones can live again, he wisely notes that that question and power is well out of his wheelhouse. But he says, "You, God, you know the answer." I often preach about our call to be partners with God in recreating the world and bringing Christ's kingdom more fully to earth. But it's also important to remember that some things are just beyond our power. We cannot knit dried bones back together and make them move. We cannot breathe spirit and life into them, but God can. And sometimes we need to be reminded that when we are faced with death, when we are faced with hopelessness, with a pile of dried bones, our role is not to futilely try to make them whole again, to bring back flesh and breath, but rather to wait and watch for what God will do. Sometimes it is simply too much for us, but it is never too much for God. We are given a really beautiful example of what this letting go and waiting for God looks like in our gospel lesson. Martha rushes to greet Jesus and immediately says that even now she knows that he has the power through God the Father to step in and set all things right. Confronted with death and the grave, she knows it is beyond her ability to change anything. But she knows precisely who Jesus is, and she speaks and leans into that truth. And indeed, Jesus affirms it, saying, I am the resurrection and the life. He is not just a powerful miracle worker, but he is in fact the author of all life, and even life that can overcome death itself. For all of us, death is the final equalizer. None of us will escape, no matter how powerful we are, no matter how important we are. In the face of death, our own and others, we are helpless. We can do nothing for Lazarus. We can do nothing with the valley of dry bones. And sometimes we need to be reminded of our helplessness. Now let me be clear. This is not an excuse to avoid going out and doing what we can do. This is not an excuse to avoid God's call on our lives. But it is a reminder that sometimes it is time to admit our helplessness and trust in something bigger than us, bigger even than death itself. God makes dry bones into a living community in Ezekiel. In John, Jesus brings Lazarus back from the dead. But before he does that, there is this incredibly touching detail. Jesus is deeply moved by the loss of his friend, by the sorrow of Lazarus' community, and apparently by the wrongness of death itself. And what does he do? Jesus weeps. When we are in the midst of death and tragedy, looking out over a valley of dry bones, experiencing the horrors and loss and pain of this world, we are not alone. God weeps. Now, why doesn't God just fix it all? Why weep? Why not just come in and make it all better? I don't know. Maybe it's to honor our free will and give us the chance to grow into a people and a world who walk in the footsteps of Christ in loving and caring for all, and especially the marginalized. Or maybe it's for some other reason that is just too grand for me to grasp. But this I do know. What breaks each of our hearts breaks God's heart so much more. Our God is the one who knows every hair on our head, who knows when each sparrow falls. Our God knows every life lost to starvation, to bombs, every sorrow, every fear, every despairing heart. And as much as we weep, God weeps with us and for us that much more. Jesus mourned that death had come. He was moved by the pain of the people around him, and he entered into it with them. Next week on Palm Sunday, we will begin Holy Week and begin to walk with Jesus to the cross. It was there that Jesus chose to be fully with us in our sorrow, in our rage about the world's injustices, in our encounters with death. He could have been an aloof God who chose some other much easier, much less painful means of salvation. Or he could have simply washed his hands of us, given up. We're so prone to going astray and inviting death in over and over again. Why continue to seek us out? But Jesus did. He chose to enter completely into death, into abandonment, into the violence of the world, to take it on to himself. There is no horror, no sorrow, no death we encounter that Jesus didn't encounter first on that cross when he pulled all of that onto himself. So when we feel alone with the world's horrors, when we are looking over that valley of dry bones, it's okay to be overwhelmed, to know it's simply too much. Because the truth is that it is. But remember, we, you, me, none of us are alone. The one who is the author of life, the one who is resurrection and life itself, has been there, weeps with you, and in some way that we may not yet understand, has already overcome it. So we can let go and rest in the love and power of God, knowing that even the worst of this world and death itself cannot overcome the God of life who chooses solidarity with us and is working the power of resurrection even into the spaces that seem most completely bereft of hope. Yes, we should do all that we can, but sometimes we need to remember we are but mortals with no power over death. We need to let go. Yet we are loved beyond words by the one who took death and despair into his very being on the cross in order to overcome it. And Christ will be faithful to overcome all that impedes the abundant life he came to give for each one of us, for our entire world. So let's immerse ourselves in the one who is the resurrection and the life. Let us let the God who is big enough to overcome it all hold us and breathe the spirit of life into any valley of dry bones that is inside you, that you see in the world. God's Spirit is moving. God's breath is here. Let's let it move through us and bring what is dry and desiccated back to life. Amen.